Welcome back to Legacy, the Business Succession Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Jared Pilon. In the first 3 episodes, we built a foundation. We talked about why every business owner needs a succession plan. We clarified the difference between exit planning and succession planning. And we discussed when business owners should actually begin preparing. Today, we're shifting into something more practical. We're going to walk through the most common mistakes business owners make when approaching succession planning. Not theoretical mistakes, real patterns that show up repeatedly. And more importantly, mistakes that are avoidable with the right level of awareness. This episode is for educational purposes only and is not specific legal, tax, or financial advice. Let's start with the first mistake. Waiting too long. This is by far the most common mistake. Succession planning is almost always, treated as a future problem, something to deal with later. Something to think about once the business is bigger, more stable, or closer to retirement. But as we've discussed, time is one of the most valuable inputs in the entire process. When planning is delayed, options begin to disappear. Tax strategies become limited. Corporate structures become harder and harder to adjust. Leadership development becomes very rushed. And decisions are made under pressure rather than by design. The challenge is that waiting rarely feels like a mistake in the moment. The business is running. Cash flow is coming in. There's no immediate pressure to change anything. So why would you do anything at that point in time? And then nothing changes until something ultimately forces it. Sometimes that pressure comes in the form of an unsolicited offer. Sometimes it comes from a health event. Sometimes it's just due to burnout. But when the timeline is compressed, the quality of decisions is often reduced. The second mistake is focusing only on the tax aspect. Don't get me wrong, tax matters. In Canada, the difference between a well-structured transaction and a poorly one can be significant. The lifetime capital gains exemption can materially affect after-tax proceeds. Corporate reorganizations can change outcomes meaningfully, but succession planning is not just a tax exercise. When owners focus exclusively on minimizing tax, they often miss the broader picture. Leadership capability, operational independence, family expectations, employee retention, governance structure. It's entirely possible to design a highly tax-efficient exit that creates instability in the business afterwards. And that instability can have real-world consequences for your employees, for your customers, and in some cases, even for deferred purchase price arrangement. Let me make that more concrete. Imagine a business owner who negotiates a strong sale price and a very efficient tax structure. On paper, everything looks successful, but the business is heavily dependent on that owner. Key relationships have not been transitioned at that point. The management team has limited decision-making experience. After the transaction closes, performance in the company begins to decline. If part of the purchase price is tied to future performance through an earn-out, for example, that decline can directly affect what the owner ultimately receives. The transaction was optimized, but the transition was not. Tax efficiency matters, but it's only one piece of the overall plan. The third mistake is avoiding difficult conversations. This is especially common in family businesses, but it shows up in non-family businesses as well. Questions like, who will lead? Who will own? How will ownership be divided? What happens to people who are not involved in the business currently? What happens if expectations don't align? These are not easy conversations to have, but avoiding them does not eliminate the underlying issues. It simply delays them. And over time, silence allows assumptions to form. One person assumes leadership. Another assumes equal ownership. Another assumes the business will eventually be sold. If those assumptions are never discussed, they become expectations. And expectations, when unmet, tend to create conflict. In some cases, that conflict does not show up until a triggering event occurs. Perhaps a potential or proposed sale, a retirement decision, a change in compensation. At that point, positions can become entrenched, and resolution becomes much more difficult. The earlier these conversations happen, the more flexibility exists. There's more time to adjust, more time to think, more time to align. Avoiding the conversation does not preserve harmony. It often postpones the conflict. The fourth mistake is overestimating the value of your business. This one is very subtle, but it is also very common. Owners naturally view their business through the lens of the effort that they put in, the years of work, the risks that they've taken, the sacrifices that they've made, the challenges they've overcome. But buyers do not value your effort. They value the outcomes. What does your cash flow look like? Is there stability in the business? Is there transferability in the business? What does the risk profile look like? Do you have depth of management? And is there clarity of financial information that you can present? If a business depends heavily on an owner, or if the financial reporting is inconsistent, or if key relationships are not transferable, value may be lower than expected. This can create a gap between expectation and reality, and that gap can delay decisions, or cause deals to fall apart, or force owners to continue longer than they intended. But here is the important part. Most of these value drivers are not fixed. They can be improved. Management depth can be developed. Financial reporting can be strengthened. Client relationships can be transitioned. But those improvements require, you guessed it, time. And that brings us back to the first mistake. The fifth mistake is failing to document the plan. Many owners believe they have a plan. They know in their mind what they intend to do. They know who they would like to take over their business. They have a general sense of the timing. But if the plan is not documented, it truly does not exist. It cannot be commuted clearly. It cannot be tested. It can't be coordinated with other advisors. And it cannot be executed consistently. A written plan does not need to be overly complex, but it should address key elements: ownership transition, leadership transition, the overall timeline of the plan, key risks associated with the plan, contingencies put in place. Without documentation, even the most well-intentioned plans can break down, because different people interpret things differently. Documentation creates alignment. It turns intention into structure. And structure is what allows execution. If you step back, there is a pattern across all of these mistakes. They're not primarily technical failures. They are behavioral. Waiting, avoiding, assuming, overestimating, failing to formalize. The technical side of succession planning can be complex, no doubt about it. But most breakdowns do not happen because of the technical limitations. They happen because decisions were delayed or conversations were avoided or assumptions were never challenged. The owners who navigate succession well tend to approach it differently. They start earlier. They engage in those difficult conversations. They seek objective input, and they revisit and update their plan over the course of time. And they recognize that succession is not a single event. It is a process. Let me give you a simple comparison. Imagine two business owners with similar companies and similar financial performance. One begins planning 10 years in advance. The other waits until 2 years before his exit. The first owner gradually reduces dependence on themselves. They develop management, they clarify expectations, and they improve financial reporting. They structure ownership thoughtfully. By the time they exit, the business is stable, transferable, and aligned. The second owner, however, is working under pressure. There's less time to develop that leadership aspect, less time to restructure the corporation, and there's less time to address expectations. What does this create? More uncertainty, fewer options. The difference between these two outcomes is not intelligence. It's simply timing and intentionality. 3 practical takeaways. First, most succession planning mistakes are not technical. They are behavioral. Second, time reduces these risks. Starting earlier makes almost every aspect of succession planning easier. Third, clarifying and clarity in valuation, communication, documentation, one of the most valuable things you can create. If you are unsure whether any of these issues apply to your situation, we've created a structured business succession planning ebook available at our website at legacyllp.ca. It walks through the major components of succession readiness and helps identify areas that you may need further attention in. It is designed as an educational framework to better support planning and conversations. Again, it can be downloaded at legacyllp.ca. In the next episode, we're going to shift focus slightly and talk about something that is often overlooked: the emotional side of letting go, and why that can be one of the most challenging parts of the entire process. Thank you for listening to Legacy, the Business Succession Podcast. If you're building something meaningful, it deserves a thoughtful transition. We'll talk again soon. Take care.